Overwatch 1 is finally returning, well, sort of. Today, the Overwatch team dropped a brand new trailer for Overwatch Classic, an arcade mode that will bring Overwatch back to popular moments throughout the game's history. Intended to be a recurring event, we might see it bringing back iconic moments such as the 2017 Moth meta to the very controversial triple tank, triple support Ghost meta. But for now, the mode will launch starting with the original 1.0 release of Overwatch from May 2016 all those years ago. The event will last for 3 weeks starting from November 12th. As an OG player, I was there from day one of Overwatch's launch, and boy was it a completely different beast back then. There were many abilities that we haven't seen for years, for better or worse, and the gameplay was much more chaotic than what we know today. I personally am very excited to relive that nostalgia and revisit what made Overwatch so memorable in the first place, and so, for today's video, I thought it would be fun to take a trip down memory lane and do a quick refresher on everything new, or should I say old, in this first iteration of Overwatch Classic. Overwatch Classic will feature the original roster of 21 playable heroes and 12 maps across 4 different game modes. These heroes are divided into 4 rather than 3 categories, with DPS heroes separated between offense and defense, as well as the typical tanks and supports. At launch, there was no role queue, so the choice of team compositions is less limited and can be much more interesting depending on what sort of team you want to run and what works best for you. Apart from that, other general differences included ultimate costs being a lot lower back then, so each hero would be able to charge and use their ultimates a lot faster, as well as ultimate charge being much more generously salvaged if interrupted. Health pools, damage outputs, and projectile sizes were also quite different, and these will also be reverted to before the Overwatch 2 Season 9 update. Of course, what made launch Overwatch feel so different and perhaps unrecognizable from the Overwatch 2 we know today is some of the original abilities that have either been reworked or removed entirely because of how game-breaking they were. Let's take a look at these abilities and what the heroes looked like originally at launch. Starting off with the offense heroes, Cassidy for the most part was not too different. He had more damage output, with Fan the Hammer dealing more damage per projectile. His flashbang, however, actually stunned enemies rather than just hindering them, so I'd say it was a much stronger version of the ability. Finally, his Deadeye was more versatile, as he could cancel it from firing and save up to half the ultimate charge if you decided not to use it. Moving on to Genji, his Dragon Blade was quite a bit more lethal, as he could attack for up to 8 seconds instead of 6. His double jump also resetted after wall climb. Pharah's original kit gave her more opportunities to be airborne and allowed her to boot opponents off the map more freely using Concussive Blast. She also had higher splash explosion damage from the rockets in her rocket launcher. Reaper's passive, the Reaping, will return to its original form where soul orbs are dropped from enemies, which will give Reaper 50 HP. His Wraith form also cannot be cancelled early. Next up, Soldier 76 was not really changed much throughout Overwatch's history, however his heavy pulse rifle dealt less damage at 17 per projectile. His rifle also has no recoil but will have increased spread the longer you hold it. Similarly, Tracer has had mostly tuning changes throughout Overwatch's history, and her playstyle was also relatively unchanged. Her Pulse Bomb, however, dealt more damage and can finish off most heroes with ease, even tanks. As for the defense heroes, Bashan had a much different kit at launch than what it has today. In its sentry form, it was immobile with a very powerful cannon that dealt an insane amount of machine gun damage. In its tank form, Bashan equipped a powerful long-range cannon that fired explosive shells in a wide blast radius for a limited time. Bashan also had a self-repair ability to restore its health but cannot fire weapons while using this ability. Hanzo's most notable change was of course his scatter arrow. For those of us that remember, this rage-inducing ability reflected a volley of arrows off walls and could almost single-handedly negate chokes and tight spaces. I absolutely cannot wait to be on the receiving end of this again, and I'm definitely keen to see what the new players think of this one. Finally, Hanzo didn't have a lunge jump passive, and so his mobility was a bit more limited. Junkrat originally had a more risky playstyle, as damage from his frag launcher was also dealt to him as well. Concussion Mine also had only one charge, so it limited how Junkrat chose to use the ability to jump into action or deal damage to opponents. Mei's original kit was, in my opinion, much cooler, no pun intended. Her primary fire was able to quickly freeze enemies after a short duration, to which she could then follow up with a deadly icicle to the head. Her Ice Wall was also a lot harder to take down as well, having 500 health. Torbjorn's original playstyle revolved around building his tools and collecting scraps from both allies and opponents to gain resources. These scraps allowed him to deploy armor packs that gave additional armor to allies. Torb's turret also had different levels that could be upgraded with his Forge Hammer. His original Molten Core ultimate gave him increased attack speed, additional armor, and instantly upgraded a level 2 turret to the missile launching rapid fire level 3 turret. Widowmaker was a lot deadlier in launch Overwatch, where she had faster charge shots and dealt more damage at long range. However, Grappling Hook also had a longer cooldown, which made her more vulnerable. Moving on to tanks, Diva's original kit was more static and didn't have the micro missiles that was later added in. Her defense matrix continuously channeled for several seconds between a 10-second cooldown, and Mini Diva could be damaged by the blast of her own ultimate, which also took 4 seconds to explode. Reinhardt also had less options in his kit, as he didn't have the advantage of 2 Fire Strike charges and a smaller HP pool. However, his Earth Shatter had more horizontal and vertical range, which helped him to land it a bit more easier. His barrier health was also much higher than it is currently. Roadhog was also a bit less versatile at launch, but his hook had a crazy hitbox and would catch anything and everything around him. If you got hooked, it pretty much meant you were dead thanks to his 1-2 combo with Scrap Gun and Melee. His Take a Breather ability was also on a short cooldown and could heal half his health extremely quickly. Winston's original kit didn't have a long-range attack from his Tesla cannon, which was introduced in Overwatch 2. Also, the cooldown of his barrier projector only started when the shield expired instead of when it was deployed. Last but not least, Zarya originally had separate cooldowns for a barrier, so you had to be selective with whether to protect yourself or your teammates. However, she was able to gain energy from those abilities a lot higher than in the current live game. Moving on to supports, Lucio hasn't really changed much, with the most notable change being his crossfade, which was effective at a radius of 30 meters versus the 10 meter radius in his current kit, although it provided less healing to allies. Mercy, of course, had a mass res as her ultimate, which was arguably one of the most powerful abilities in the game at that time. She could turn the tide of a fight with the press of one button, but it also meant that her gameplay was a lot less dynamic, with many players resorting to a hide-and-seek playstyle to maximize the effectiveness of her ult. Her movement in general was also more restrictive, as she couldn't as easily use text besides bunny hop at the time. Symmetra, yes, Symmetra was a support hero originally, and the only one that didn't provide any form of healing. Her kit focused on providing utility, where she was able to give shields to allies, place an exit teleporter anywhere on the map that linked to the active spawn room, and also had 6 turrets to lock down an area. Her primary fire was also more lenient, being a lock-on beam, but her secondary fire was much slower, although it could hit multiple enemies at once. Finally, Zenyatta has remained relatively unchanged, although he didn't have his snap kick passive that was added in later, and his Discord orb increased damage received to the target by 50%. Those are the main hero changes we can expect to see with Overwatch Classic. Of course, we will also be seeing the return of 2CP or Assault with iconic maps such as Hanamura, Temple of Anubis, and Volskaya Industries coming back, so I'm very excited to play those once again in a 6v6 format. As for map changes, certain maps will retain their Overwatch 2 reworks and elevated mechanics such as Dorado, Numbani, Route 66, and Watchpoint Gibraltar. I'm assuming it may have been too much work to revert the maps to exactly how they were originally, but I don't think this is really an issue. As part of the nostalgia of playing Overwatch Classic, players will also only be able to use the original Overwatch default skins for the event, so we won't be able to equip other skins when playing. Another thing the devs mentioned is that Overwatch Classic is not tied to their broader 6v6 plans, as it's meant to be a nostalgic experience to revisit moments in the game's history, and that 6v6 will be specifically tested separately in future updates. Let me know how you guys feel about Overwatch Classic, which abilities or things about the original game you are most excited to experience, and thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.